So what I'm going to cover today is staffing models, and also I need to review some material on the supervisory org. It's going to be, there's some portions of the supervisory orgs that we covered yesterday, but I want to talk about the assign roles activity. We saw a little bit of that yesterday with assigning the manager role. I'm going to talk about the organizational assignments for the supervisory orgs. Then we'll talk about the staffing models. Then we'll talk about creating a cost center and locations and creating companies. And we'll talk about the job and position. We'll start that. Okay. So there's things we're going to cover today. I uploaded a activity sheet yesterday based on like what we talked about with respect to the supervisory orgs. Please take a look at it if you haven't. And okay, so since I can't get into the tenant right now, I'll come back to the soup org and the assign roles, and we'll talk about the staffing models. So staffing models basically means the process or the method that the company uses to create requisitions or positions and to hire people. So when you're hiring, not in the the functional process, but on the back end, you have to decide which model we're going to follow. So there used to be three kinds. There used to be position management, job management, and there used to be headcount. But now there's only two: position and job management. And these two models exist so that based on the type of company you are and the type of hiring, you could select the appropriate one. So staffing models are used to determine how jobs are defined and filled, and they provide different levels of control over the staffing. Okay. And the staffing models is associated with the supervisory org. So yesterday when I was showing you the supervisory model within the Workday tenant, we saw that at the bottom it's listed what model it follows. Okay. So in position management, its characteristics are that it allows for most control. So if you want a lot of control over the position creation and hiring, you would use position management. And it allows you to have a separate hiring rules and restrictions for each position. Okay. Hiring restrictions are things such as what is the management level this position is for, which location you're going to hire in. So when you create a position to hire somebody in, sometimes we call that a requisition. You could have a restriction on there that says San Francisco. So that means when you hire someone, it could only be, the work location could only be San Francisco, if that's the restriction that you have on there. But obviously sometimes things are in flux and you may need to hire someone in Denver, Colorado. So having that kind of restriction is not going to be good. But you could definitely do that. And then you could also have that restriction, and then you could say you could override that restriction. So you'll see that there's a choice called override restrictions. In position management, positions can be open after a job change. So when someone leaves a particular job and they move to a different position, the position that they're occupying becomes unoccupied and open. Okay. And positions can be moved from one supervisory org to another as part of job change. That means if I'm a benefits analyst and I move to a recruiting organization, then my benefits analyst position will stay in the benefits department, and then in the recruiting, I must have a different position or a different requisition which I'm going to fill. So the true headcount is actually based on the number of seats, and position is like the seat that the worker is sitting in. So if I was the benefits analyst, I'm sitting in the benefits analyst chair. If I move to recruiting, I'll sit in a chair that's in the recruiting department, and my chair that was in the benefits analyst becomes empty. Okay. And positions can be closed if not needed. So it sounds kind of complex, but it's actually pretty simple. But it is a decision point during the implementation, and it can be changed afterwards as well. And I'm going to go on, but we'll come back to discuss it in more detail. Under the job management staffing model, this allows for most flexibility and speed because you don't need to create a particular position every time you want to hire. In this one, any kind of restrictions that you have, like for example, you want to hire someone in San Francisco only, those type of restrictions would be at the organization, at the supervisory org level, rather than at the each position or requisition. Okay. And no quantity is defined for the number of jobs available for hire within an org. So here, you could just go to the supervisory org, and you go to the hire menu, and you could just hire people one after the other. And under job management, a position no longer exists after worker is transferred, basically transfers out from that particular position, unless it is moved with the employee. And then also, positions under position management, they have hiring restrictions. And under job management, the supervisory organization has the hiring restrictions. Okay. So hiring restrictions are the rules and conditions in a position or job management that allows you to limit or restrict who is hired into an organization. So restrictions can be based on job family, job profiles and locations, or worker type. There's multiple worker types such as employee or contingent worker, worker subtype, and then full or part-time, or no restrictions are at all. Or you could also have a choice that says override position restrictions. So under position management, hiring restrictions apply to a single unfilled position, but under job management, the hiring restrictions apply to every job created within the supervisory org, because the restrictions are at the supervisory org, so the restrictions will apply to every job, not to every position. Each supervisory org has a staffing model like we saw. So that determines the process and the approvals and restrictions for opening and closing positions. And you also define, like when someone transfers out, what happens to that particular position. So transferring out means this person is sitting in a payroll chair. Now this person moves to a different. Does that payroll chair, go with him or her? So likely it's not going to be, the chair that you're sitting in, the position that you're sitting in is not going to go with you because you're going to occupy a different type of chair. Okay, so here's a screenshot of just showing that this supervisory org, the human resources supervisory organization, they have staffing models is position management. So that's where you identify what type of staffing model that you have. Staffing models can be assigned while creating an org or after it is created as a separate task. So in Workday, in the search box, you will type edit staffing model, and you could change it. But like I say in the second bullet, once a position has been created or hiring restrictions have been set, the edit staffing model task is no longer available. So you could only change the staffing model before you actually set the hiring restrictions or create a position. Okay. But if you have not done either of these two tasks, you go to the supervisory organization. So in this example, you navigate to the wealth of knowledge. This is a supervisory organization that you would create in the demo instance. And then you go to the related actions, and then you go to organizations and then edit staffing model. So maintain staffing models. It allows you to view all supervisory orgs that have staffing models selected, but do not yet have any positions or job created. So if you go to that menu, then you'll see any supervisory orgs where you can make a switch. So you could switch from position management to job management. You'll see that it says headcount management. While Workday still has that on their UI, but headcount management no longer is available as a staffing model. Okay, so some review. So which staffing model has the most control, which is the most flexible? These are actually common interview questions, so we should be able to explain them. So you have control at the supervisory org based on these, but at each position, so then you lose the flexibility there. So what happens in the real world is if you're a fast-growing company and you have a lot of staffing needs, you need to hire a lot of people and you need to hire them quickly, then you want to go with job management. Because in job management, you just need to create the supervisory org. You set the restrictions once, or you typically, if you need to hire fast, you select no restrictions, or you say override restrictions. And so a lot of the startups or smaller companies that need to grow fast, they actually use job management. So they don't have to enter job family, they don't have to do worker type, time type when they're doing the actual, I mean, they can, but in order to hire fast and to do the transaction fast, you could say no restrictions. So for startup or a fast growing company, it's better they use job management. Position management gives you a lot more control in the sense that before you could create a position, you typically, not only you have a very extensive approval process, where finance is involved, you have to make sure there's some budget allocated for each position. But in each position, you could have, you make sure that this is only available in, San Francisco. You could only hire contingent workers or part-time. So it's much more restrictive. So if you need more control, and you don't want to just hire fast. You want to make sure, in times where you have to pay attention and you have to justify every single hire. That kind of company is probably using position management. In trying to think of like some companies, I mean, job position management is definitely recommended. So you'll see that a lot of companies, they use position management. And then, after they're implemented, they're like, this takes too long to go through the hire process or to, to do a position transfer. So if you're using position management and you want to transfer someone from, benefits to recruiting, that means you'll have to create a new position for that person, because obviously the benefits analyst position is not the one that person is going to occupy when they're in the recruiting department. So at the time of transfers and promotions, position management also gets in the way. And it gets in the way because you need to create a new position for, if you're going to a different department or you're getting promoted to a different level. But people don't want to do that work. So I'm actually experienced at a company where they have position management, but they decided, you know what, if we're going to promote someone and they're going to stay within the engineering organization, if they're going from engineering level 1 to level 2, etc., we're going to keep the same position because it's just not worth the hassle to create a new position. They just give them a new job profile and then give them a new job title, a new business title. But if you look under their position history, you'll see it's the same position throughout their whole history. So companies, based on consultants' advice, they will implement position management, but it becomes a little bit hectic when you're not hectic, but it's more time consuming, especially when you're doing transfers and promotions, that you'll have to create a position every time the person is going to move into a different department. But yeah, based on the culture of the company, you'll choose either one of these at the time of implementation, and then sometimes you will, some clients want to reconsider and they want to change it. But changing it has an impact on your business process. So if you could change this, but you have to change all the associated things such as the higher business process as well. Once the position has been created under the position management or a hiring restrictions have been set, you could no longer change it. You could only change it for new organizations going forward. So changing it is going to become a big task. Basically, you will have to create new supervisory orgs and move people into the new. Basically, you will have to create a new structure from the top down, and then move people into that new structure that will have the new staffing model. So it's probably not something that's recommended, but I do see occasional posts on the Workday community like, hey, we're looking into changing this. How do we go about it? So it can be done. Obviously, if you're a company of like 1,000 employees or 3,000 employees, then you only have 200 or 300 supervisory organizations. Yeah, you could recreate them using a load file and move people into them, and then you could set the a different staffing model. But you're for if you're a 50,000 employee company, then you may have one particular department that's hiring a lot, and you just create new supervisory organizations for that particular function, and then they could do faster promotions or hiring. When you're creating a supervisory org, even if you're using one type as a this is the decision we have made, but both options show up. So, but obviously as consultants or at Workday support, we don't decide anything ourselves. We have to get the requirements from the business, and then part of that list of requirements should be which type of position, which type of staffing model we use. You should, but if the implementation was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the end users or the HR folks, they may not even know. They may not even know what a staffing model is. So you have to investigate yourself, like which model they have been following by looking at, other supervisory orgs. Question number 5, which staffing model requires a position to be open in order for a worker to be hired? Staffing models can be changed at any time following deployment. False. They could only be changed as long as you don't have any position created that any supervisory restrictions on the supervisory org level. So let's do an introduction into the jobs and positions. So positions and jobs, they both use what's called a job profile as their foundation. So when we say job profile, this is not just one field. Job profile is the overall characteristics of a job or a position. So in sense, the management level, the grade level, all of these things, they make up what's called a job profile. So whenever we think job profile, don't think this is just one single field, but it's all of the characteristics of a job or a position. Okay. Job profiles can be assigned to multiple positions or workers. They can have one-to-one relationship with a position, like there's only one CEO, but you could have one-to-many relationship, like an executive assistant. There might be many executive assistants in the same job profile. In the Workday, job category hierarchy, you have what's called a job family group, and then underneath that job family group, you have what's called a job family. Then you have job profile, and then you have positions, which are built on job profiles. So as Workday folks, we're not responsible for coming up with what is the job family group or the family or the profiles or the positions. There is what's called, the HR partner or the compensation partner. This is their expertise. Like they come up with, what is the name of all the job groups. They will usually do an exercise, which is, 2 to 3 month exercise where at the time of implementation, they will make sure that they have all the job family groups are proper and aligned with what their business needs are. So they will kind of standardize their job families, and then they will say, okay, within this particular job family, these are the job profiles. These are the workers within that particular job profile. But on the Workday side, we have to be able to set up or load the job family groups that have been given to us. We also load the job families, and we also load the job profiles. And then positions are usually created, as you need to hire, except at the time of implementation when you take the existing workers and their positions and load them. Okay. So in this example, you have a job family group called human resources. And then under human resources, you have multiple job families. You may have HR services, which are the HR specialist or the HR generalist. And then you have HR benefits as a separate job family. Obviously, other groups, functional areas such as finance or sales or marketing, they have their separate job groups and separate job families and positions. But basically, this is the hierarchy of how jobs are classified. Any questions on this? Into creating a position, just we'll talk about how to create it. A position is created within the context of a supervisory org. You need to have an open position available before you could staff a supervisory org if using position staffing model, unless you're bringing that person's position with them. And then there are some mandatory fields such as posting title, number of positions, availability date, and the earliest hire date. When you're creating a position, you could also set the default compensation at that point. This is just going to be a default compensation, which is kind of like a guideline to the recruiter. And then obviously when you're actually doing the hiring, at that time you will edit that default compensation to based on whatever the final compensation that has been decided. Okay. So when you're creating the position, you set the default compensation by going to this menu, position, related actions, and then select compensation and request default compensation task. So if you follow that 3 dots, you will get to the page that says request default compensation, and that's where you could enter some initial guideline on what the position can offer. And you could include request default compensation step in the create position or in the edit positions business process. So I'm going to search up, the soup org, and I'll check on human resources org. So here we're going back to 6x45 human resources. Logan is the manager, and we transferred one person, James Moore, into this. We did not change his position. We brought his position with him because I used the move worker functionality, which it just brings, it brings that data over. There's no choice under move workers to change the position. Obviously, like I said, this was for the backend way of doing it. Typically, the HR user or HR partner, they won't even know about the move worker. They will use what's called change job, which we'll see later. So under here, when we scroll down to the different menus, we saw roles. Okay, I want to talk a little bit more about that. So this comes into the security model, and we talked about one role called manager, but there are other roles as well. So I want to show some of those. So because this, if we see here, the roles that are listed on the left-hand side. So all of these roles, they were their default because the organization above them had these roles. And then hierarchy owner, that's assigned at the supervisory org. The only one that we assigned directly was the manager. So we assign manager. But we see that the HR partner role is empty. There was another role just called HR role. Senior HR partner, or some companies have what's called like a talent manager. So some of these roles are delivered by Workday, such as manager or HR partner. But most of these roles are created by each company at the time of implementation or as needed. And we're going to talk about how to create a role. But in this demo, I just want to show how to assign other roles as well besides manager. So HR partner, because if we're going to hire someone, we have to look at the hiring process, and within that hiring process, the HR partner may need to approve. And if there's no HR partner assigned, then we won't be able to do the hiring later on. So we go down to roles and then assign roles. So when you come to that assign roles screen, at the top here is the roles that you have directly assigned, or the roles that have been assigned for the support. I shouldn't say directly assigned because we did not assign owner, it's there by default. So the assigned roles are here, and all of the current roles are listed at the bottom as well. And if we're going to assign a role directly at that support level, we go here, we click on the plus button, and you see HR partner. We have senior HR partner. HR partner is not available for this org. And then we have to assign it to somebody. So as simple as that. Now, Logan, or it could have been anybody else, so whoever I assigned this role, remember it has their position listed. So the theory behind this is that the role is assigned to the position. It just so happens that Logan is in that position right now. if Logan was to transfer out, then this, and if the position goes with them, then this role becomes empty. And then you have to assign another HR partner by coming back to this supervisory org and assign the HR partner at that. Yes, in normal everyday world, when we say, hey, what's your role at the company, we're talking about our jobs, right? We say, hey, I'm a IT consultant, and that's my role. But in Workday, Workday reserves roles for their security configuration. Some of the other roles that you should be familiar with. So there's typically a finance partner. So there's a finance executive. So whoever needs access to this particular department or supervisory org, the role needs to be assigned for them. One issue that always comes up, because there's no default access, is for IT. So IT folks, they need access to the employees in the human, or they need access to employees in the company. But by default, there is no IT partner role. And then they don't need access to everything. Obviously, they don't need access to the compensation information. So in that case, you need to create a role for them, and you need to give permissions to that role through some type of security group. And then you'll create a role called IT partner, and then you'll assign it to the IT folks. So that's an example where you have to actually create one. And outside of, if you don't have a role assigned to you, you cannot even see the employee number. So that's kind of really annoying for IT folks, that when they go into Workday, by default, they can't see the employee ID. They don't have access. So one of the first things you have to do is create a role for IT. So just want to make sure you're familiar with some of the roles and where we need to create them. Obviously, we're going to cover security in one of the sessions, so we'll cover it at that point. But recruiter is another role. So recruiter is allowed to create the positions within that particular supervisory org, so you assign that. And then when we're searching for who's going to assign it to, you could, I put in recruiter. I did not put in the person's name. I just wanted to get a list of everybody who were occupying a recruiter position. So these showed up, and I'll just select one as a recruiter for this org. Okay. So when we come back to the supervisory org, and then under the orgs tab, here are the people that we assign to the recruiter role or to the senior HR partner. And then this effective date, that means Logan as the HR partner, like if I know she's listed as the manager as well, but pretend she was not the manager, she was just the HR partner. She would only have access to the data or to the workers in this organization after June 7th. So it is effective date. So while there might be you could do a load for that, but it's usually 10 people or less. So for roles, I've actually never used a load file to do that. Here I'm going to say, let me pick a facilities role. So there might be like 3 or 4 people, but we have searched by name or searched by position, and we have to assign all 3 of them. It wouldn't be worth it to to look up the load file to create to assign roles. So you could definitely do that. Basically, anything that you need to assign to more than one person can be done by a load file, but this is probably the quickest and the easiest way. And remember I said when you need to select multiple people, you go to the one that you want and all the ones above it. Like if I want to select everybody or select everybody, I go hover over that, press the shift button, and all of them get selected by default. And then I could unselect what I don't want. So it's a quick way to select multiple people. Okay, so I want to show you that under assigned roles. And then there's another area under every supervisory org called organization assignments, which we need to cover. Okay. So when we create a supervisory org, you want to make sure that the people that are hired or transferred to this organization, they're also part of any particular company or cost center or region. So in order to make sure that the people hired in that org, they're also part of a company or cost center or region by default, you could list that company under the default organizations. So at the time of when we're creating this soup org, ideally you select the default organizations as well. So I'm going to go ahead and edit, and I'm going to go ahead and put in a default company, a default cost center, and a default region. So that means when you create a position, if you have something in the default organizations area, then you don't have to enter that again at the time of hiring. So the default values will show up. You could definitely edit that, but at least it gives guidance to the person doing the data entry what that default org should be. So let's edit this and put in the company cost center and region. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so we go to the default org. We can look up the different companies. I'm just going to randomly pick one. Global Modern Services, USA. Sorry, I think we were doing the default organizations, not assigned roles. So that was the navigation for assigning roles. But to set up the default organizations, it's going to be supervisory, edit, supervisory organization. So there's multiple edit things. You could edit the primary location, or edit the supervisory organization, or edit just the name and the code. So in this case, I'm going to edit the supervisory organization so I could get back to the default organizations tab. So notice this is not. So I'm going to assign a default company. This comes in handy when you're actually hiring someone. So if you have set up the default, then during the time of hiring, you don't need to select it. Global, I want to select global modern for the US. Can't find that. There's also a tab called Allowed Organizations. So this means if I select some cost centers here, so I select HR services, human, and I also select see what this error is. Okay, AT human resource is not a valid organization type. So okay, so let's look at the cost center example. I have said for when we hire someone or transfer someone by default, 41,200 payroll, that doesn't even make sense, but 41,200, we put on HR services. Okay. By default, the HR, this cost center will show up on the transfer screen or the hire screen. We could put restrictions on which cost centers can be used when we're hiring any, based on what we put under allowed organizations. So this has a pro and con to it, and it's also a discussion point where it could either become a smooth process during transfers or it becomes a cumbersome process. So if you use the allowed organizations column, that means you could only hire or transfer people into this human resources organization if they're in these cost centers. So if they happen to be in payroll or recruiting, yeah, then they could transfer into this supervisory org. This was fine at the time of implementation, and everybody said, hey, this is really great because it prevents you from transferring people who are not in any related function, so you don't make that data entry mistake. So it sounds really good. It puts a restriction on which cost centers employees could be moved into this supervisory org. But what happens is, 6 months down the line, you create new cost centers. So if you create new cost centers and you don't come back into each of the super orgs and update the allowed organizations, now that new cost center is not listed here. So if you're trying to transfer that person to this supervisory org, you're not going to be able to do that from the front end because that new cost center is not listed here. So one thing you have to make sure is that whoever is creating the cost centers, which is usually the finance folks, then and when you create them within Workday, if you're using the allowed organizations function, if you're using this column at any of your orgs, you need to come back over here and update the allowed cost centers for that particular organization. Otherwise, your transactions become really cumbersome. For one client, actually, we decided to just remove the allowed organizations because no one had updated them, and you could not transfer people without going to every single org and updating the allowed organizations. So if you don't have anything in here, then you could bring people from any cost center into this. So like organizations such as sales or marketing, they're always doing reorgs and they're creating new cost centers or they're dividing their supervisory organizations. For those orgs, it's probably best to, not restrict them based on allowed organizations. But if you do restrict them, you have to make sure that this is updated and maintained. So if a transaction fails or that cost center is not showing up in the list, it's probably not listed here. The HR partner, they could take some actions here, like HR partner has access to, they they have access to assign a superior or create a subordinate, but HR partner does not have access to roles. Okay, so, oh yeah, I was going to show you where the staffing model was located. So under the staffing tab, it tells you which staffing model you're using. And any of the open positions, say that it says here, like senior recruiter unfilled. So this position is available to fill. And then any in progress transactions. So here's a data change. And this probably has a future effective date. So that's why it's still listed here. Or is waiting approval by somebody. There's a question on identifiers. Let me just put that in the discussion block. Okay, so next, let's talk about creating a new cost center. So we talked about the supervisory organizations, but more people are familiar with just departments or what we call cost centers. So I'll go through the navigation, and the navigation for cost center is either already in the document that I uploaded, or I'll upload it today if it's not in there. So cost center is a grouping of employees by a who perform like a similar function, but cost center is something that's usually finance organizes, in contrast to the supervisory org, in which we organize people based on HR, human resources hierarchy, or worker hierarchy. Finance will give you a list of cost centers, and they have people who work on a similar function, and they're organized into one cost center. And the common word for cost center is department. And in the format of the department, there's usually a four-digit numeric value of a particular cost center, and then it has a name. And it's usually, at the time of implementation, finance team will give you like the list of cost centers and the people who belong in them. You could have more than one cost center within each supervisory org. So within this org, you could have people from multiple cost centers, if need be. And along with cost centers, yesterday I showed you guys the type of organizations that are available. So we saw there was cost center, we saw there was company, region. Those were the finance-related organization types. And then for HR, there was supervisory org, matrix organizations, and a retiree organizations that were listed on my slide yesterday. Okay, so creating a department, or what we call a cost center. So as simple as create cost center. Workday does, force you to come up with a reorganization name and an effective date. This helps, and the reason for this is that, say, you have a major reorg. So like in June, you have like an engineering reorg, and you want to link all of the changes that you do to this particular event. So having a reorg label to all the changes helps. In the employee history, you could say, okay, this change was due to that particular reorg event. So every time you create a company, or you create a cost center, and then a couple other things, you'll see this thing pop up, says reorg. So that just means you need to give a label to the transaction you're going to do, and it's usually something like, if you were to create a new reorg, you might say something like June 2020 engineering reorg, or HR reorg. And once I create this reorg, then I could use this multiple times for all of the related changes that this reorg could be a company-wide or a department project. So it allows you to organize your changes based on that particular project name. Okay, so we're going to call this one June 2020 HR reorg, and the reorg date is June 1st, 2020. Usually, when you're creating you have an existing supervisory org, right? So you're going to go to actions, and you're going to go to create subordinate or assign. So when you do it this way, it just asks you for the effective date. So, but when you're creating a company or a cost center, then you definitely need to have a reorg. And there's a couple other areas as well where the reorg is needed. So I'm going to create a new, I'm going to call it HRIS, or let's call it Workday HRIS Cost Center. And let's give it a number, 1, 2, 3, 4. Do we want to include this code as part of this name? So if it's yes, then we select this. Since we're creating a cost center, the subtype by default shows up as cost center. Visibility, you have to make sure it's visible to everyone. Otherwise, only the people who are assigned to this will have access to it. I actually, as a best practice, don't use this. Then the cost center is not visible all the time or all people, and it gets very confusing. So it's just best to choose everyone. Sometimes for cost centers as well, if you have a cost center that spans more than one geographic area, and you want to make sure that you have an HR partner who has access to everybody within that particular cost center, then you could assign like HR partner role to this cost center as well. Using the plus and then HR partner. But unless you need to assign a role or related work tag, which is a finance task, this is all you have to enter. So this creates the cost center. Obviously, it does not move any people in there. So here we have Workday HRIS, and let's assume this is going to have a global team, right? This is going to have people from the US, it's going to have people from Bangalore, it's going to have people from Philippines. It could have multiple people. But typically when you assign HR partners, the HR partners who have ability to do transactions, a lot of times they're based on regions. So you have an HR partner for the US, you have an HR partner for Asia Pac. Obviously, you could assign HR partners based on supervisory org as well. They might say, hey, I need the HR partner needs everybody access. The HR partner needs access to everyone within Asia Pac, but they should not have access to anybody in the US. So if the company has HR partner restricted by a geographic area, but so I have one HR partner for the US and one HR partner for India, but I want to make sure that the person, whoever is the HR partner, they have access to everybody in this cost center, regardless of where they're located. So in addition to having that HR partner assigned at the geographic level, if I have the HR partner assigned to this cost center, and people in this cost center, some of them will be in US and some of them will be in India. So if you want one HR partner to have access to everybody in this department, regardless of where they're located, then you will assign the HR partner role or whatever role that is at the cost center level. And then there's the allowed type of roles. When we get into security, or actually, I was going to show the maintain roles. I'll show you right now why only these roles are listed here, but the HR partner is not. So I'll show you that in a second. Okay. So let me go ahead and create this. Okay. So this cost center has been created, but it does not have any workers in it yet. But you could do mass worker transfer just from the cost center, from one cost center to another from the actions menu. Okay, so under reorg, you have inactivate reorg, or you also have move workers by org. Okay. So in this case, nothing's going to show up because I don't have anybody in 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll select a different cost center that actually has employees in it. See no items. So I'm going to view cost center. This one does not have any either. Okay, so I went to the 41600 HR services, and it has login in it. So if I needed to move login, I mean, typically in real world, you'll have like 10 or 20. So using this functionality, you could quickly move everybody from one cost center to another. I did a future date. But this move workers by org, just like this is available at the supervisory org, you can select workers and then move to a different org. Okay, cost centers, you could assign roles as needed. I kind of running out of time. Let me do create company and create location really fast. Okay. So another type of organization that we talked about is the company. And so company is every licensed entity of your organization in other countries. So a company typically has a federal ID or some type of is a business entity. And as a particular company such as ServiceNow expands into multiple companies, multiple countries, you'll have to establish a fully licensed or an organization in that particular country. So companies within that, not like a company as in like LinkedIn, but each entity, each business entity of that organization in multiple countries is what a company is. So in our tenant, for training purposes, I think it has got multiple companies. So this one is Global Modern Inc. USA. There's also Canada. So you say view company, and you can see all of the members within that particular company. Usually, it's not a concern to human resources because finance folks maintain the companies. but they might ask someone in HR or HR administrator or Workday support to create that company. And you could also assign roles at the company level as well. And then the company details, such as when it's available or the type, the code. These are the information that you have to provide when you're creating a company. The navigation, so that's to view a company. To create the company is just as easy. You say create company. Here, you do need to give a name, and I'm going to use the one that I already created. So I'm going to search for the keyword June, and the ones that I created before showed up. It depends. In this, all these changes are part of one project. There was a reorg at the company. We're going to create new cost centers. We're going to create new companies, or we're going to deactivate cost centers, and they're all part of one. They're all part of one project. So in this case, I'm going to use the same reorg. But if they're totally separate events, like months apart, then it makes sense to just create a new reorg. But frankly, no one really pays attention to the reorg label. It doesn't really show up on any reports, so it's just kind of one of these annoying things that you have to do, but really doesn't have any particular impact. Well, at the time of implementation, right, there has to be at least one company besides the actual, so if the company is headquartered in the US and you have a business entity in the US, so you will create that company along with, so you will at least have, at the minimum, you will have one company, and it's for reporting purposes. And when you create a supervisory org, you will have either a default company, or if there's only one, and you have to select that company as whenever you hire someone into that supervisory org. So every supervisory org that's underneath that company, you could report the employees by company as well. So not just by the supervisory organizations. So supervisory orgs, they're kind of subset, or they're in the hierarchy of things. They fall every supervisory org falls underneath a company. So it must have some company. But this is the in the United States, this is the entity, or if it was in the US, it will be incorporation or corp or limited liability. So this would be information about that. So I'm going to just say Hong Kong Incorporated, and this would be a company, visibility to everyone. But it kind of sits, on its own. But it's useful in finance, and it's useful for reporting purposes. Where are your people? What kind of cost? Then you could do your cost by company or any other metric. Actually, I don't know the currency in Hong Kong. Anybody know that? Do they have a separate currency? Oh, yeah, Hong Kong dollar, I guess. So unless your company is expanding to a new country for the first time, you probably will not be setting up a company. But you just need to be aware that, hey, you could create a company, and you could move workers underneath this company, because companies do expand globally. Let's quickly do locations. So to view the existing locations, there's multiple reports. There's also a location directory. So I'm going to type location directory. So this will list all the locations that are in the Workday tenant here. So we see that there's 104 of them. It has the location name, location type. So there's something as a local office, and then there's also, headquarters. And then the address detail is required. And then you could download this list. You could export it to Excel. One thing to be aware of is when you define someone as part-time, or someone that typically works 40 hours, and now they're going to work 30 hours. So that standard for how many hours is actually listed at the location directory. It's listed at the location. So for Boston, if we view this, we list the standard hours for that particular location. So I'll get to that. This is Boston, is part of the, it's got the location type of local office or service center. Here, they have not defined a location attribute or superior location, but it's handy to do that. So for example, you might have India as the location, but then you have Bangalore, or you might have Uttar Pradesh. So those would be, India would show up as the superior location for those states. So it just kind of helps in reporting. When you're creating a location, you need to have the address and phone number, whether it's going to be business site or it's going to have, it's only for shipping. But we see here, there's a time profile, and it says standard hours 40. Okay? So that means anybody who's hired into this particular location, by default, Workday is going to assume that their work week is 40 hours. And during the job change process, when you're changing a location from one person, you're transferring an employee from one location to another, and they're going to change the number of hours, you actually have to go to the location tab to do that. So, most people don't, it's kind of like, why would you go to the location tab to change the hours? But that's, it's because the default standard hours is based on the location. So during the transfer process, to change someone from 40 hours to say 30 or 32, you will have to go to the location tab. And we'll see that when we actually do a transfer. But just want to make sure, I just want to give you the reason why you have to, why the hours are maintained at the location level. Let me quickly do a create location before we end. So in this case, I'm going to create a local site. We'll just call it business site. It's also a ship to, and we have a training room there. Yeah, you could definitely use that for. Yeah, definitely that would be a good use case for it. Usually, I've seen if it's a local office or a corporate headquarters, or is only for shipping only. But there's just about 3 months ago, Workday also launched workspace, and then a couple other categories. You could also do cubicle. So it's how the business wants to define it. So there's no, like, from a Workday perspective, there's no hard and fast rule that this can only be used, but it's going to be depending on how a business wants to use a particular location type. So for example, now we have a cubicle, because you could also maintain workspace where the person sits. So obviously in this case it's Hong Kong City, so I'm not going to use cubicle for it or building. In this case, this is a local office. And then within this local office, I could, this would be the superior location, but I could also create I would say create location, and I would select building. So I would create that particular building, and then I'll create another location as a cubicle. Probably makes sense to do a load file for the cubicles if the company is going to use that functionality. But this functionality is actually very new. It was actually just launched in March in Workday 2020 release 1. Okay, so it's going to be location type of local office. Let me just enter some. It's going to force you to put address in the Hong Kong format, and I don't have any particular Hong Kong address, so I'm not going to fully type in the address. But to want to make sure you're aware that based on the country that you select, these fields are per that country's format. So there's a district, address line 1, line 2, and there will be training room details. So one key point is every location, it requires an address. So what happens when you have remote folks? So that's always a interesting thing. So you're gonna have people who are working in California, but they don't come into the office. They're 100% remote. Or you could have people in Texas, or you might have people anywhere in the world, but they don't come into a physical office. So, but when we're creating a location, even if it's a remote one, I'm going to create a remote California location. So even if it's a remote California location, I still have to put an address. So in the Workday community, we kind of established as a best practice that since there's no real address for a remote location and Workday does require it, you go to the capital city of that state or that country, and you put in that as the address for that remote location. So that's how we kind of address that, because for people who are working remote in California, if I use our company's headquarters, then they'll show up on the address report as working on, yes, their label would be remote California. If you want to just go by that, that's fine as well. If you just go by the location name. But if you have a location report by address, and if you put in your headquarters address, then they'll show up as working at the corporate headquarters in California, but they're really remote. So basically at all of the companies I've worked at like 5 different companies that have used Workday. We basically put in the address of the capital city or the capital building, and we'll put that as the remote location address. I mean, obviously you could decide on doing something else for it, but that's one way to deal with that. Headquarters will have its own street address, right? It will have 1, 2, 3 particular street, but the capital city the address for the capital, like for example, if you're using Sacramento, you actually have to put in the street address for Sacramento's capital building. So that street address will be different.